The cameras rolled live as millions tuned in for what was billed as a routine Senate hearing on government transparency. But what they got instead was an electrifying confrontation no one could have predicted. On one side sat Senator J.D. Vance, confidently flipping through his notes. On the other, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, sharp, focused, and quietly waiting for her turn to speak. The moderator gave the floor to Vance first. He took a deep breath, leaned into the mic, and began, "What the American people need is accountability. We've had far too many public officials making bold claims without evidence. I think today, we need to separate facts from fiction." There were murmurs in the audience, polite applause, even, until Jasmine leaned forward, her voice calm but piercing. "With all due respect, Senator Vance," she said slowly, "if we're talking facts, let's begin with one that's been kept from the public for far too long." J.D. Vance froze slightly, clearly caught off guard. "What are you referring to, Congresswoman?" Crockett didn't blink. A classified energy contract, worth over $300 million, was greenlit in your state last year. The problem? The company that received it is run by one of your top campaign donors. Gasps rippled across the room. The cameras zoomed in on J.D. Vance, whose confident expression faltered for the first time all morning. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jasmine continued, "I have the signed correspondence, time-stamped emails, and payment records. Would you like me to read them out loud, or should we submit them to the Ethics Committee first?" The crowd erupted. Phones were out. Social media lit up. Hashtags trended before the hearing even ended. And J.D. Vance? Still speechless, the moderator banged the gavel twice, trying to restore order as the crowd's reaction surged like a tidal wave. Staffers glanced nervously at one another, reporters typed furiously, and even the normally composed panelists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. J.D. Vance finally managed to lean forward toward his mic. His voice was quieter than usual. "Congresswoman Crockett, I don't know what documents you're referring to. If you're implying wrongdoing, that's a serious accusation." Jasmine didn't flinch. "It's not an implication, Senator. It's a fact. And unlike the claims often made in these hearings, mine come with hard proof." She raised a folder in her hand. Its label was plain, "Confidential Procurement Files, Ohio Contract #274-C." As Crockett opened it and began reading, the room fell silent. "March 17, 2024, she read. "Correspondence between Senator Vance's Chief of Staff and Jackson Energies, LLC, the Senator has reviewed the proposal and finds it favorable for fast-track approval. We trust this project will reflect well on your continued support." J.D. Vance shook his head, but the microphones caught the unease in his breathing. "That's taken out of context," he said weakly. "My office supports many private initiatives, and this one," Crockett cut in, "also happens to have funneled over $600,000 into your PAC just months before the deal was finalized." Another explosion from the crowd. Someone shouted, "Expose him," before security quickly hushed them. Jasmine leaned back in her seat. "You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about influence peddling and backroom deals." Vance was visibly rattled now. His hands fidgeted beneath the table. He tried to speak again, but the words tangled. He wasn't just speechless anymore, he was cornered. The moderator glanced at the clock, then at J.D. Vance, then back to Jasmine Crockett, clearly unsure whether to step in or let the moment play out. Crockett didn't wait. "I have no interest in political theater," she continued, her tone calm but razor-sharp. "But when a senator uses his platform to accuse others of making bold claims without evidence, while quietly profiting from insider access, that's not just hypocrisy. That's corruption." J.D. Vance finally found his voice, strained, defensive. "That's a baseless attack, Congresswoman. My team has always acted within the law." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Then why did your team try to have this subpoena blocked last month?" She held up a printed court document. Filed by your counsel, attempting to delay the release of these emails under the guise of national security. You want transparency? Here it is. The audience, even members of the press, now leaned in with stunned expressions. The silence was heavy, electric. Vance stammered, We requested that delay because it involved sensitive infrastructure details, not because, but you didn't redact a single line about the energy grid, Jasmine interrupted. You redacted names. Names of donors. Names of contractors. And names of individuals who have since been appointed to advisory roles in your office. Boom. That was it. A wave of reactions swept across social media, live streams, and cable news tickers. J.D. Vance's aides whispered among themselves, clearly panicked. His communications director reached for a phone. It was damage control mode. Meanwhile, Crockett closed the file and looked directly into the camera. To every American watching this, don't let polished speeches fool you. This isn't about party lines. It's about power, money, and whether elected officials are using your trust to enrich themselves. The crowd didn't just lose it this time. They rose to their feet, the gallery erupted into a standing ovation. Applause thundered through the chamber, drowning out the moderator's repeated calls for order. Even a few staffers on the sidelines couldn't hide their stunned expressions, some blinking in disbelief, others subtly nodding in approval. J.D. Vance sat motionless, his jaw clenched, eyes darting between Crockett, the folder on her desk, and the sea of reporters capturing every frame of his silence. When the room finally settled, the moderator cleared his throat. Congresswoman Crockett, while this committee respects your right to bring forward new information, we do ask that you submit all relevant evidence to the clerk. I already have, she replied coolly. Every document, every timestamp, every transfer, it's been turned in this morning. J.D. Vance leaned toward his microphone again, this time trying to reclaim control. Let's be honest here. This is political grandstanding. If this were truly about ethics, it wouldn't be breaking on live television. Jasmine gave a faint smile. You're right. It should have broken months ago, but your legal team spent all that time trying to keep it buried. So I decided it was time the public saw it for themselves. She turned slightly in her chair and looked out toward the crowd. I didn't come here to play defense. I came to defend the truth. And if the truth is uncomfortable for those in power, that says more about them than it does about me. The entire moment was already viral. Clips of her last sentence were spreading across every major platform. Headlines exploded within minutes. Crockett unleashes bombshell on Vance in live hearing, Senator caught in donor scandal. Congresswoman demands answers, J.D. Vance speechless as Crockett reads the receipts, and backstage. Producers from multiple cable networks were already fighting to book Crockett for primetime interviews. Back in the chamber, J.D. Vance sat stiffly, the silence around him more damning than any direct accusation. Then he tried again, slower, more measured. I've always stood for transparency. If there are questions about campaign donations or private contracts, I welcome a formal investigation. But the words fell flat. The conviction was gone. The audience knew it. The press knew it. And Jasmine Crockett? She was already steps ahead. I'm glad to hear that, she said, straightening her notes. Because the House Oversight Committee has already been briefed. I've personally ensured that this information is now part of a bipartisan ethics review. Vance looked stunned. You've already opened an ethics inquiry? Jasmine nodded. Yes. As of 8:15 this morning. Unlike the backdoor meetings that benefit private interests, I believe the people deserve transparency in real time. A rumble went through the room. Not outrage, admiration. J.D. Vance glanced around nervously. He knew what was happening. The narrative was slipping through his fingers, and Jasmine Crockett had seized it with precision. Then she delivered the final blow of the day, Senator, the American people don't want apologies after exposure. They want integrity before temptation. That single line hit like a thunderclap. Even members of the committee who typically opposed Crockett sat in stunned silence. One even gave a reluctant nod of approval. J.D. Vance leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a tight line. He had no comeback. Outside the chamber, the fallout was already spiraling. Reporters swarmed the hallways, cameras flashing as headlines evolved by the second. Meanwhile, political strategists were scrambling behind closed doors, unsure whether to defend Vance or quietly back away from the controversy. Inside, the hearing moved forward, at least on paper. But in reality, no one was listening to the next witness. All eyes and thoughts were still fixed on the seismic exchange between Jasmine Crockett and J.D. Vance. Crockett, unfazed, reviewed the next item on her agenda as if she hadn't just detonated a political bomb on live television. She knew how Washington worked, timing was everything, and this moment had been calibrated to perfection. One of Vance's aides passed him a note. He glanced at it, then crumpled it in frustration. Whatever message it contained, it hadn't helped. Suddenly, he asked to speak again. "If I may respond, briefly," Vance said, his voice shaky but composed enough to mask his panic. The moderator granted him the floor. "I want to make one thing clear," he began. "I have never used my office for personal financial gain. The documents Congresswoman Crockett brought forward are misleading at best and will be proven inaccurate." Jasmine calmly turned her mic on. "Then I welcome your testimony under oath," she said. "And if the documents are misleading, I'm sure you won't mind releasing your full communications with Jackson Energies. No redactions. No stalling. Just the truth." Vance paused. That pause said everything. The crowd didn't need to erupt this time. The silence itself was deafening. And once again, J.D. Vance had no words. The tension in the hearing room had settled into something heavier than noise, a weight. J.D. Vance sat frozen, blinking slowly, like a man calculating how far the damage had spread. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained perfectly composed, her posture sharp, her expression unreadable. The moderator tried to shift the hearing forward, but it was clear, the room had moved on from its original agenda. Backstage, a producer from one of the top networks whispered to their anchor, "Get ready. This is going to lead every hour." Even members of Congress who typically dismissed Crockett as too bold, now leaned toward her, not out of support, but out of fear. She had just shown the entire country that she was not only prepared, she was lethal with facts. Meanwhile, Senator Vance's phone buzzed continuously on the desk in front of him. His team had likely seen the polling reactions, social media blowback, and news alerts stacking up by the second. Jasmine leaned forward once more, her voice quieter this time, but somehow even more powerful. "This isn't just about one contract," she said. "It's about a pattern. A system. A way of operating where political power gets traded like poker chips, and the public is the one left with the bill." She glanced across the panel. And today, the game got interrupted. J.D. Vance looked like he wanted to speak. But his mic light stayed off. He knew better now. The hearing broke for a short recess, but the energy in the building didn't ease. In the corridors, reporters rushed to get reactions. Staffers from both parties huddled behind closed doors, whispering about what just happened, and what it meant for the coming elections. Some called it a calculated ambush. Others called it the most honest moment in Congress all year. Jasmine Crockett walked calmly through the hallway toward the press area. She wasn't chasing a spotlight, the spotlight was chasing her. A CNN reporter shouted, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe Senator Vance should resign?" She paused, looked directly into the camera, and answered, "I believe anyone who can't defend their actions under oath has no business writing the laws that govern the rest of us." Gasps. Another viral clip. Another trending quote. Back in the chamber, J.D. Vance remained seated, staring at the table in front of him like it might swallow him whole. One aide whispered something, but he didn't respond. His career, once seen as rising fast in conservative circles, now teetered on the edge. The scandal wasn't just about the energy contract anymore, it had become a symbol of something much bigger. A battle between transparency and privilege. Between performance and principle. And Jasmine Crockett had emerged as the unlikely face of that battle. As the hearing reconvened, the atmosphere was transformed. What had started as a routine committee meeting now felt like a national reckoning, one that no one, especially J.D. Vance, could escape from. The moderator attempted to steer the proceedings back on course, introducing the next witness. But everyone knew it was just for show. The real story had already been written, and it wasn't in the day's agenda. J.D. Vance sat in brooding silence, occasionally glancing at the media gallery, where camera lenses never left him. He wasn't answering questions anymore. He was the question. And Jasmine Crockett? She listened attentively, took notes, and occasionally whispered to an aide, a portrait of calm control. She didn't need to say another word. Her bombshell had already detonated. The ripple effects were doing the rest. Meanwhile, on the Senate floor, murmurs began swirling of an emergency GOP meeting scheduled for that evening. Unofficially, it was to evaluate damage control. A few Republican senators tried to deflect media attention, claiming selective editing or political stunts, but even they looked unsure. The documentation Jasmine provided wasn't just solid, it was surgical. And Vance? He looked like a man trapped in slow motion, caught between outrage and humiliation, unsure which one would hit first. Then, as if on cue, Jasmine received a folded note passed from her aide. She opened it, smiled subtly, and tucked it away. It was confirmation. The House Ethics Committee had just publicly acknowledged the opening of a formal inquiry. The room didn't need an explosion this time. The weight of silence said it all. News of the ethics inquiry broke before the hearing even ended. Journalists were practically sprinting to file updates. Notifications lit up across phones in the chamber. Headlines scrolled across live broadcasts in real time. Breaking: House Ethics Committee launches investigation into J.D. Vance over donor ties, Crockett's claims confirmed, formal review underway, bombshell fallout, J.D. Vance faces firestorm, Vance's team scrambled. His chief of staff left the room mid-hearing. His press secretary issued a rushed, one-line statement: "We welcome transparency and will cooperate fully." But it was already too late. The narrative wasn't about cooperation, it was about consequence. And as Jasmine Crockett sat silently at her desk, watching it all unfold, the public could see what real political power looked like, not in volume or theatrics, but in facts delivered with precision. The other members on the panel shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of their own vulnerabilities. If Crockett could expose a rising star like Vance, who else might be next? Meanwhile, on Twitter, a new hashtag exploded. #CrockettEffect. One user wrote, "Jasmine Crockett didn't just check J.D. Vance, she checked the whole system." Another added, "She walked in with a folder. Walked out with his career." As the moderator finally brought the session to a close, there was no applause, just a heavy silence, full of realization. And the look on J.D. Vance's face? He knew what everyone else already suspected. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. This was political extinction. By the end of the day, Washington was in full meltdown mode. J.D. Vance's office released a longer statement in the evening, attempting to dismiss Crockett's revelations as a coordinated smear campaign based on misleading documents. But legal experts were already poking holes in that defense within minutes. Former prosecutors appeared on cable news dissecting the emails. Campaign finance watchdogs confirmed the timeline. Even conservative-leaning outlets had to admit, this wasn't just smoke, there was visible fire. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett was already being hailed as a breakout force in Congress. Interview requests poured in. Editorials praised her precision. Pundits across the spectrum marveled at how she had delivered one of the most devastating exposures on live television, without shouting, without personal attacks, without breaking a sweat. In a post-hearing interview, she kept it simple. I don't care what letter is next to your name. If you're serving yourself instead of the people, you're gonna have a problem with me." Clips of that quote were shared millions of times. J.D. Vance, once a favorite on the conservative circuit and whispered about as a future VP pick, was now surrounded by headlines like, "From rising star to political freefall, can J.D. Vance survive the Crockett bombshell?" Meanwhile, Jasmine quietly returned to her office, where a bouquet of flowers from a group of grassroots organizers sat waiting, with a handwritten note, "Thank you for showing what real representation looks like." She didn't stop to celebrate. She simply smiled, sat down, and began preparing for her next hearing. The battle wasn't over. But today, the message had been sent loud and clear. The sun set over Capitol Hill, but the political aftershocks from the day's hearing were just beginning. By nightfall, multiple outlets confirmed that Senate leadership had privately urged J.D. Vance to step back from public appearances until the ethics review concluded. His usual media allies had gone silent. Even some of his fellow senators, once eager to stand beside him, now spoke only off the record, distancing themselves from the growing scandal. Behind the scenes, fundraising emails were being reworded. Strategies were being rewritten. Damage control had turned into full-blown crisis management. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett. She didn't boast. She didn't gloat. She knew this wasn't about winning a moment, it was about shifting a culture. That evening, she appeared on a major news show. When asked how it felt to dominate a national hearing and leave a senator speechless, she replied without hesitation, "I didn't come here to dominate. I came here to disrupt what needs to be disrupted." The host blinked, impressed. "So what's next?" Jasmine smiled slightly. "Accountability. And not just for one senator. For everyone who thinks public service is a pathway to private gain." Social media lit up once more. Late-night hosts rewrote their monologues. Voters, especially younger ones, shared the clips like wildfire. The Crockett effect had become more than a trend. It was a movement. And as for J.D. Vance, he left the Capitol under the cover of night, no reporters, no statements, no cameras. He had walked into that hearing with his reputation. And walked out with a question mark.